Chapter 1 Family. Robinson Crusoe was born in England in 1632. His father was German, and his mother was English. He had 2 brothers and 1 sister, and they were a good family. His father was a successful businessman, and they had plenty of money. Robinson received a good education and had a comfortable life, but he also had a dream. He wanted to travel by sea and see the world. His father wasn't happy about this dream. The situation became difficult when Robinson was 18 years old. His father called him to his room for a conversation. During their talk, his father questioned why Robinson wanted to travel by sea, warning him that it was dangerous and uncomfortable, and that he could die. His father began to cry as he spoke these words. Robinson contemplated his father's warnings. Indeed, traveling by sea was dangerous and uncomfortable, and death was a real possibility. However, the prospect was also very exciting. He could see new countries and meet new people. He thought about traveling by sea every day, finding it difficult to stay at home. He tried to speak with his mother about his desires, explaining how much he wanted to travel by sea and see the world. He asked for her help in convincing his father, but despite her deep love for Robinson, she shared his father's opinion. She believed sea travel was dangerous, and that staying home in England was best for him. A year later, in September 1651, Robinson visited Hull, a town in England. There, he met a friend whose father owned a ship. They frequently traveled by sea, and their next journey was to London. His friend invited him along, and though Robinson wasn't prepared for this journey, he decided to try it to see if seafaring suited him. The journey to London started well. The first hour was wonderful, but then problems arose. They encountered a storm that grew increasingly severe, with stronger winds and bigger waves. The ship pitched up and down, and Robinson was terrified, thinking longingly of his home and comfortable bed. When the storm passed the next morning, the weather was pleasant, and the evening was beautiful. A sailor approached Robinson, and they talked. The man made some jokes and asked about the weather. When Robinson mentioned his fear during the storm, the sailor laughed, calling it merely a little wind. He offered Robinson a drink, and soon Robinson was drunk. He slept well that night, and by the next day, he had forgotten about his home and comfortable bed, dreaming instead of more sea travels. The next 3 days brought poor winds, and they progressed slowly. When the wind strengthened, they moved faster, but then another storm hit, bigger than the first. Robinson was truly frightened, and he could see that even the other men were scared too. Chapter 2 Storm. Robinson was so terrified that he could only lie in his bed. Looking outside the window, he saw waves as big as mountains. Other ships appeared like toys as the waves tossed them about. He desperately wanted to return home. The storm was so severe that everyone prayed to God for help. Then someone discovered a hole in the ship, and water began pouring in. It was a terrible situation. Many men went below deck to pump out the water. Robinson was too scared to move until one man came and ordered him to help. As they worked to pump out the water, they heard a gun signal from their captain, an indication of serious trouble. Robinson believed they had no chance of survival, as their ship was badly damaged. Despite their hard work trying to pump out the water, the hole was too large, and more water kept flooding in. Though the weather improved, the ship was filling with water, and they needed help. They spotted another ship ahead of them, which sent a small boat to their rescue. The rescue crew risked their lives to save them. They all managed to board the small boat, but it was impossible to return to the rescue ship as it had drifted too far away. 15 minutes later, their original ship sank beneath the waves. Though they were safe in the small boat, Robinson remained terrified. They saw land and tried to reach it, getting closer and closer until they finally saw people on the beach. These people from a nearby village waited for them and showed great kindness, helping them and providing money for travel to either London or Hull. Robinson chose to travel to London by land. In London, he met a captain who offered him the opportunity to travel to Africa. The captain was very kind and told Robinson about the business opportunities there, advising him what to buy in England that would be valuable in Africa. Robinson purchased items that were cheap in England but expensive in Africa due to their scarcity there. The journey to Africa proved successful, and Robinson returned to England with a profit. Eager to travel more and conduct more business, he also wanted to learn how to navigate a ship. The captain taught him basic sailing skills. Robinson decided to go to Africa again, but this journey would bring great troubles. One morning, they noticed they were being followed by a pirate ship. By afternoon, the pirates had caught up with them and attacked. Despite their attempts to fight back, many of their men were killed or injured, and they were ultimately forced to surrender. Robinson, along with the surviving crew, became prisoners of the pirates. Chapter 3: Woman. Being young and strong, Robinson became a slave to the pirate captain. He felt deep sadness, as slaves led a horrible life of hard work. Every day, he worked many hours in the house or garden at the captain's command. Hating his situation, Robinson yearned for freedom. One day, he met a beautiful young woman in the house who was also a slave. She cleaned the house, and though she didn't speak his language, Robinson felt she understood him. He was very attracted to her, and she would smile at him, occasionally touching him briefly when she passed nearby. However, they had to be careful, as the captain would send her away if he noticed their interactions. Robinson thought about her often, wanting to see her every day, though she wasn't always in the house. When he thought of her, he felt a warmth in his heart, imagining her as his girlfriend and himself as her boyfriend. Yet their relationship was complicated. Slaves were forbidden from having relationships, which saddened him deeply. Sometimes the captain would take Robinson fishing with him in a small boat, along with a young boy. They would occasionally fish with the captain's friends. One day, fog surrounded their boat, leaving them lost and unable to see. They spent a whole day and night trying to reach land, finally succeeding the next morning. After this incident, the captain insisted they use a larger boat for longer journeys. One day, the captain gave Robinson specific instructions to load more food and drinks onto the boat, along with some guns, in preparation for important guests who wanted to fish and hunt. When the guests never arrived, the captain told Robinson to prepare the boat for fishing the next day. Robinson saw this as his opportunity to escape, as plenty of guns and food were already on the boat. He considered taking the young woman with him, but couldn't figure out how to manage it. The impossibility of bringing her along saddened him deeply. On the morning of his planned escape, he hoped to see her one last time in the house. When he did, she was more beautiful than ever to his eyes. Their eyes met, and she seemed to understand that something was different, that this would be their final moment together. She looked deeply into his eyes and touched his hand, her face reflecting the same sadness he felt. She gave him a small smile before walking away, marking their last encounter. An hour later, Robinson and the boy were ready to leave with the boat. One of the captain's friends accompanied them as their supervisor for the day. Chapter 4: Lion. Once they were far from land, Robinson pretended he couldn't catch any fish, causing them to venture further out. When their supervisor went to the front of the boat, Robinson quickly pushed him into the sea. As the man tried to swim back, Robinson took a gun, and upon seeing it, the supervisor swam away. Robinson then turned to the boy to see if he was on his side, and was relieved to find that he was. After 2 years of captivity, Robinson was finally free. They sailed as fast as possible, helped by favorable winds, and by the next day, they were far from the pirate lands. Still fearful of being caught again, Robinson wouldn't let the boy stop the boat for 5 days. On the 6th day, feeling safer, they approached land where they found a small river. Not knowing their location but needing fresh water, they waited until dark to travel up the river where the water wasn't mixed with seawater. However, they began to hear horrible noises. The boy, frightened, didn't want to continue, so they stayed near the river's mouth. Unable to sleep, they heard animals coming to drink from the water, making terrifying sounds. When one animal began swimming toward them, the boy begged to leave, but Robinson refused. Instead, he took a gun and shot at the animal, which turned and swam back to shore. The gunshot scattered the other animals as well. They remained on the boat until morning, when they ate some bread. The boy expressed a desire to go to the beach, and Robinson agreed to accompany him. They took 2 large bottles to collect fresh water from the river. While the boy ventured inland alone, Robinson stayed on the beach, wanting to keep the boat in sight. The boy returned with what looked like a chicken, making them both happy to have fresh meat and water. Robinson only knew they had traveled around the coast of Africa, but their exact location remained a mystery. They seemed to be in an uninhabited land, hearing only wild animals occasionally. One morning, while collecting fresh water, they encountered a lion on the beach, merely 20 meters away. When the frightened boys saw the lion charging toward them, Robinson had to act quickly. He had 3 guns and shot the lion 3 times. The first bullet hit its leg, the second its head, and the third finished the animal. Though they couldn't eat the meat, Robinson took the skin and dried it atop the boat. Chapter 5 Ship. For the next 10 days, Robinson and the boy continued their journey around the coast, stopping only when they needed fresh water. Soon they saw signs of habitation, and one day they encountered a large group of people with many children watching them from the beach. Robinson wanted to stop, but the boy was wary of the idea. The people on the beach tried to give them food. 2 men ran to the forest and returned with dried meat, but there was a challenge in making the exchange. They didn't want to swim to the boat, and Robinson and the boy were hesitant to go ashore. Seeing this dilemma, the people placed the food on the ground and retreated. When they were far enough away, Robinson and the boy collected the food. As they were thanking the people, 2 animals emerged from the forest and charged toward the group. When one animal attacked a young girl, Robinson shot and killed it, causing the second animal to flee in fear. The people were shocked by both the sound of the gun and the sudden death of the animal, but they were grateful that the girl was saved. In appreciation, they brought more food and water to Robinson and the boy. With their boat well stocked, they sailed for 10 days without stopping. They spotted some islands the next day, and Robinson considered visiting them, but at that moment the boy shouted, having spotted a ship. Though the boy feared it was a pirate vessel, Robinson identified it as Portuguese. Since the ship hadn't noticed them, Robinson fired a gun to attract their attention. Once aboard the Portuguese ship, they faced a language barrier as the crew spoke Portuguese, Spanish, and French, which Robinson didn't understand. Fortunately, there was a Scottish sailor who could communicate with them, and Robinson shared their story. The sailors became very kind to them and agreed to take them aboard. When Robinson offered their belongings to the captain, the man insisted on paying for them instead. Robinson sold him the boat at half the usual price and offered the rest of their possessions for free. The captain also expressed interest in training the boy as a sailor. Robinson initially disapproved, thinking the boy was too young and deserved his freedom rather than entering another form of service. Chapter 6 Wife. The boy chose to work for the captain and began his training as a sailor. The ship was bound for Brazil, where they arrived after 22 days. There, Robinson bid farewell to the boy and the sailors. Brazil was a new state in South America, where many people were starting fresh lives, and Robinson would do the same. He soon met people who owned sugar plantations and became friends with them. Growing fond of Brazil, he learned the language quickly. With the money from the captain, he bought a small plot of land and began producing sugar. Though production was modest in the first 2 years, his plantation grew rapidly. While single, his life was good and independent, with his financial situation improving monthly. Brazil required only small taxes, and their new society had few government regulations. When he had saved enough money, Robinson decided to hire a lady to clean his house. He asked his friends if they knew of any suitable woman, and one friend suggested his 18-year-old daughter, who was also a good cook. The next day, she came to Robinson's house, friendly but somewhat shy, and very pretty. After a brief conversation about his needs, she began working for him, coming every Monday and Thursday morning to clean for 4 hours and cook meals. Robinson always enjoyed seeing her, and they would occasionally share breakfast or lunch and talk together. When she fell ill for a week and couldn't come to work, he felt a strange emptiness in his house and realized he missed her deeply. He began to wonder if he was in love. When she returned after her illness, he was overjoyed to see her, and she appeared equally happy. He hugged her, and they shared a long kiss. 2 weeks later, Robinson went to her father's house and asked for permission to marry his daughter. After a moment of silence, her father agreed, making Robinson the happiest man in the world. They married 2 months later and began planning their family. This period of Robinson's life was wonderful, filled with big plans for their family and plantation. They needed a larger house, which required more money. Robinson considered doing business in Africa, where he could make money quickly, and discussed this idea with his friends, some of whom supported the plan. Chapter 7. Hurricane. One day, 3 of Robinson's friends came to his house and invited him to join them on a journey to Africa. He agreed, and they began preparing for the voyage. After saying goodbye to his wife, they embarked on their journey on September 1, 1655. Their ship was very large, though they numbered only 17 men. The vessel was loaded with trade goods, including cups, glass, mirrors, knives, and other products. The weather was good but very hot at the start of their journey. However, after a week, they encountered a hurricane of extreme force that put their ship in danger. When the hurricane passed, they found themselves near the northern part of South America, close to the Orinoco River, far from their intended course. The ship was damaged, and while the captain wanted to return and repair it, Robinson disagreed. After discussion, they decided to head for Barbados to make repairs. Before they could reach Barbados, a second hurricane struck in the evening. The wind grew tremendously strong, and the waves towered high. Then someone shouted, "Land!" But this cry brought no relief, as the ship ran aground in shallow water. Their damaged vessel was in danger of breaking apart at any moment, forcing them to evacuate to a smaller boat. This was extremely dangerous, as the small boat was barely adequate for 17 men. Once in the small boat, they faced massive waves and fierce winds that pushed them toward large rocks. Knowing a crash was imminent, they could only wait for their fate. Suddenly, a huge wave capsized their boat. Robinson found himself underwater, unable to breathe or see his companions or the boat. When his head briefly broke the surface, allowing him to breathe, he spotted a small beach between the rocks. Another wave pushed him toward it, and though still in the water, he felt land beneath his feet. Robinson knew he had to stand and get out of the water before the next wave came, but his body was weak and he couldn't move quickly enough. Another wave submerged him again, cutting off his breath, but then another wave threw him back onto the beach. He managed to drag himself 10 meters up the beach to safety, though his arms and legs were extremely weak. After collapsing and resting for a while, he finally managed to stand and search for the others. To his horror, he couldn't find any other survivors. Chapter 8. Island. Robinson was probably the only person alive from the shipwreck. He found only 3 hats and 2 shoes on the beach, a horrible discovery. Though the weather remained bad, the waves had diminished in size. He could see the ship in the distance, but his immediate situation was dire. He was wet, had no spare clothes, no food or water, and no proper weapons, only a small knife he found in his pocket. His first priority was finding fresh water, which he discovered in a small river. Fearful of dangerous animals, he fashioned a weapon from a piece of wood and spent the night in a large tree. When he woke the next morning to find the sea calm and the ship still visible, he decided to swim out to it. After taking off his clothes and swimming around the ship twice, He found a rope on one side that allowed him to climb aboard. The ship was empty, but Robinson managed to find some dry food and a bottle of rum. While searching, he heard something that startled him. Thinking it impossible that any of his friends had survived, he was slightly afraid. Following the noise, he discovered it was the captain's dog. Now he had a companion. He wasn't alone. The challenge now was transporting the food, rum, and dog back to the beach without a small boat. Robinson had to construct a raft from wood he found on the ship. While searching for clothes, he discovered a box of tools and a nice carpet nearby. He also found 4 guns and dry gunpowder. Loading everything onto his raft, he took advantage of the calm sea and favorable wind to return to the beach. Once back on land, Robinson began looking for a suitable place to stay. Spotting a hill, he thought it might provide a view of his location. Taking a gun, he climbed to the top, where he discovered he was on an island. He could see 2 small islands, one to the north and one to the west, and a large landmass about 100 kilometers to the south. To the east, there was nothing but ocean. He saw no signs of human habitation, only wild animals. Chapter 9. Tent. On his way back from the hill, Robinson saw many birds, but didn't know their names or whether they were edible. He killed one bird, but found its meat wasn't good. Returning to his raft, he moved his belongings further inland, planning to return to the ship the next day to salvage more useful items before another storm could destroy it completely. He constructed a small tent near the beach and brought inside all items that could be damaged by rain or sun. For his first night, he arranged clothes on the ground for bedding and positioned 2 guns on either side of him for protection. Exhausted from his work, he fell asleep quickly. The next day, he swam back to the ship and built a second raft. He was particularly pleased to salvage 7 new guns and some beds. He safely transported these items to the beach and made several more trips to the ship over subsequent days, retrieving many useful tools and objects, including candles and 2 large boxes of tea. During one visit, he discovered a locked box with a key hidden underneath. Opening it revealed coins from Europe and Brazil. Though money held no value on the island, he took it anyway. He also found playing cards with pictures of kings, queens, and other figures, thinking they might provide some entertainment. The following day, dark clouds gathered and the wind strengthened. Though Robinson visited the ship, he didn't build a raft that day, knowing it would be dangerous in the approaching storm. He swam back to the beach and spent the night safely in his small tent while strong winds raged. By morning, the ship had vanished. Realizing he might be on the island for a long time, Robinson began planning a more permanent settlement. He needed to be safe and comfortable, considering either finding a cave or building a larger tent, or perhaps both. His criteria for a location included proximity to fresh water, shade, defensibility, and a view of the sea to spot any passing ships. He found a suitable spot next to a large hill that provided natural protection on one side. He built a fence around the other sides, using a ladder to climb over since he didn't install a door. After moving all his belongings inside, he constructed 2 tents, one large and one small, with the smaller tent nestled inside the larger one. Chapter 10 Calendar. The larger tent protected the gunpowder and food from rain, while Robinson lived in the smaller one. After completing the tents, he began digging a cave at the bottom of the hill to store food. He used the stones and earth from the cave to build a terrace inside the fence. While still working on the cave, a storm brought lightning, which made Robinson realize the danger of keeping large boxes of gunpowder that could explode if struck. Frightened by this possibility, he redistributed the gunpowder into smaller boxes and bags as soon as the storm passed, hiding them among the rocks, a task that took 3 days. He hunted daily, both for food and as a break from his hard work. This activity helped him become more familiar with the island and its animals. He discovered goats, which provided him with plenty of meat. Despite his improving situation, Robinson often felt sad, missing his wife deeply and thinking about his friends in Brazil and his parents. Sometimes he felt his solitary life on the island was meaningless. Reflecting on his sea travels, he acknowledged how they could completely change one's life, for better or worse. Though grateful to be the only survivor, he recognized his good fortune in having salvaged necessary supplies like food, guns, and clothes, without which survival would have been impossible. To keep track of time, Robinson erected a large cross on the beach, near where he had first arrived. He carved the date of his arrival, September 30, 1659, and used it as a calendar, making a small cut each day. He marked the end of each week with a longer cut, and the beginning of each month with an even longer one. During a period of negative thoughts, Robinson decided to make a list of the good and bad aspects of his situation. On the negative side, he was alone without conversation partners and had little chance of seeing England again. However, on the positive side, he was alive, safe, free, and had food to eat. Though he lacked proper clothes, the island's climate made this less important. He also had his dog, who understood basic commands like, "Sit down," "Come here," "Bring it," "Don't do it," "Don't jump," "Let's do it," "Let's eat," and "Let's run." This list helped Robinson realize that while his situation wasn't ideal, there were still positive aspects to focus on. He continued improving his living space, expanding the cave to better organize his belongings. Chapter 11. Book. Robinson began crafting furniture, starting with a chair and table that took him 5 days to make using wood from his rafts in the ship. He then built shelves inside the cave for his tools, clothes, and guns, mounting some weapons on the walls. The organization pleased him, as he could easily find what he needed. Deciding to document his experiences, Robinson began writing a book about his life on the island. He described his days, starting with his arrival, and including both events and his thoughts. Initially, he wrote 1 page every day, but as he caught up to the present, he reduced this to 1 page per week, recording only significant events. Though his days became similar, they were never boring as he always had tasks to accomplish. His daily routine involved morning walks, work until noon, lunch, a 2-hour afternoon nap, then more work until evening. He continued expanding his cave using his tools, wanting to create a space that could serve as kitchen, living room, cellar, and occasional bedroom all in one. When the cave was nearly complete, a section of earth collapsed from one side. Fortunately, Robinson wasn't inside when it happened. After cleaning up the fallen earth, he reinforced the cave's sides and ceiling with long boards to prevent future accidents, a project that took about a week. In December, he continued working in his small camp, despite 20 days of continuous rain. The weather remained warm, allowing him to work inside, and he was grateful that the island never grew cold. At month's end, he killed a goat and injured another, breaking its leg. He took the injured goat home and cared for it. After 2 weeks, the goat grew tame enough to eat from his hand. This experience made Robinson consider keeping animals. He reasoned this would provide food when his gunpowder eventually ran out. In January, he explored the island's center and found more goats, though they were very shy and difficult to approach. Determined to domesticate some, he returned the next day with his dog, his hunting partner, to try to capture them. Chapter 12. Corn. Robinson attempted to catch a goat by positioning himself and his dog strategically. He instructed his dog to sit and wait while he circled around the goats at a distance. When the goats were between them, he hid behind a tree and shouted for his dog to come. As planned, this caused the goats to run, and when one passed close to his tree, Robinson jumped out and caught its leg. However, the goat kicked him hard in the nose with its other leg, causing him to let go. The goat escaped quickly, teaching Robinson that this wasn't an effective way to catch them. From January to March, Robinson worked on strengthening his fence, a project that took considerable time due to his desire for durability. During this period, he discovered pigeons living in rock holes rather than trees. These birds proved easy to catch, providing excellent meat and eggs. While working on his fence, Robinson found a small bag that he remembered once contained corn, but now held only leaves and dust. He emptied the bag outside his camp, intending to use it for gunpowder. A month later, to his amazement, he found green leaves growing in that spot, young corn plants. Words couldn't express his joy at the prospect of having corn on the island and the possibility of baking bread in the future. On March 16th, while inside his cave, Robinson experienced a frightening event as pieces of earth began falling from the ceiling. Running outside, he noticed the ground shaking everywhere, an earthquake. Though shocked and scared, he was fortunate that the large stones falling from the hill didn't hit his tent. After the earthquake ended, Robinson sat on the ground before his tent, afraid to go back inside. He began considering whether it might be safer to sleep in a house rather than the cave, deciding to use the cave only for storage. The next day, in April, Robinson began building his house, a project that took 3 months but resulted in a home that brought him great satisfaction. However, in the last week of July, he fell seriously ill with a fever that left him bedridden and too weak to do anything. During this time, he experienced strange, illogical dreams that seemed completely real to him. Chapter 13, Dream. One of Robinson's fever dreams was particularly bizarre. He found himself in a pub on his island, wanting to drink rum, but the waitress was lazy and just sat at the bar doing nothing. Though annoyed, he waited. Then his wife appeared, bringing him a message from her father that read, "Come home. You have to work on the plantations." Refusing to return home, Robinson went to the pub's kitchen, where he found his mother preparing steaks and cooking soup that tasted fantastic. 2 Englishmen then entered the pub, trying to sell gunpowder. One looked like a gentleman, but the other was horrible in appearance. When Robinson told the horrible-looking man that he didn't need their gunpowder because he had plenty in his camp, the man became angry. "What did you say?" the man demanded, insisting that Robinson had to buy their gunpowder since they had traveled from London. When Robinson again refused, the man grew furious. Their conversation deteriorated as they exchanged harsh words, eventually reaching a point where the man threatened to kill Robinson. As the man drew his gun, Robinson began to run. The man shot at him, and at that moment Robinson woke up. A week later, he began feeling better, but still needed rest and plenty of sleep. By August, though still somewhat weak, he was well enough to move about. Knowing he needed physical exercise, Robinson spent the next 10 days walking around the island, which helped improve his condition. Once he regained his strength, he decided to explore the entire island. In the central part, he discovered an interesting valley with a lake. There he found melons and grapes that were very sweet, along with apples, oranges, and lemons. Wanting to take some fruit home but lacking a bag, he gathered the fruit in one place and returned to his cave to fetch a large bag. However, when he came back, he found the fruit destroyed, some eaten, some broken, presumably by wild animals. Despite this setback, Robinson loved the fruit valley and its beautiful nature. He contemplated moving there, but realized its distance from the beach was problematic, as he needed to remain close to the shore to watch for any ships that might rescue him. Chapter 14, House. Though Robinson decided against moving to the fruit valley permanently, he chose to build a second house there. He began visiting the valley more frequently, gradually constructing the house over time. The project occupied him through all of August and into early September, but he thoroughly enjoyed the work. The fruit valley gave him abundant energy and made him feel healthy and strong. Sometimes, when he stayed in the valley at night, Robinson would gaze at the moon and stars, thinking of his wife and family in England. He knew they could see the same moon and stars, even though they couldn't be together. He often thought about his family, wishing them well, and contemplated all the people worldwide who could see the same moon. This made him feel connected to the whole universe. He also found himself thinking about God, questioning why he was on this island, why he survived when his friends died, and what the reason for all of this might be. Though many questions remained unanswered, Robinson maintained his trust in God, believing he knew what he was doing. When the rainy season arrived, it continued until mid-October, marking his first year on the island. After the rains ended, Robinson returned to his valley house to find the fence completely covered in green leaves. This natural growth not only beautified his property, but also provided excellent camouflage, making the house difficult to spot. Pleased with this effect, he decided to create a similar living fence around his first house. Once the rainy season finished, Robinson planted his corn seeds. Cautiously, he only used half of them, which proved wise when none of these initial plantings grew. He saved the second half of the seeds for planting before the next rainy season, and this time they grew successfully. This gave him a small farm on the island. Through this experience, he learned that the island's seasons differed from England's. Instead of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, it had 2 rainy and 2 dry seasons. This knowledge helped him better plan when to plant his seeds. Chapter 15 Basket. As Robinson began making longer trips around the island, he realized he needed a basket to carry food and fruit from the valley. He cut branches from the same type of tree he had used for his fences, dried them, and used them to weave a basket. Once it was complete, he decided to make a longer journey around the island. His exploration took him through the valley with his second house and beyond, where he discovered grass fields that were remarkably flat and filled with fragrant flowers. Numerous insects buzzed around these blooms, including impressive butterflies with wings spanning 10 centimeters. Small trees surrounded these fields, bearing nuts that differed from those in England, both in shape and in their sweeter taste. In this part of the island, Robinson discovered new animals, many parrots, rabbits, and gray cats. He managed to catch one parrot, which was gorgeously colored with red, green, purple, orange, blue, pink, and yellow feathers. The area also hosted numerous turtles and other birds. Though this part of the island seemed nicer and had more abundant food, Robinson still didn't want to relocate there. On their return journey, his dog caught a young goat. Robinson rescued it, seeing another opportunity to keep goats. He left it at his valley home, while he prepared space for it at his primary residence. Exhausted from the expedition, he spent the next day resting, during which he made a cage for his parrot and created a map of the island, marking all his newly discovered places. Time passed quickly, and soon September arrived again, marking his second year on the island. Robinson found himself less sad than before, having accepted his situation and finding contentment in what he had. His days followed a routine: hunting in the morning, cooking at noon, resting during the afternoon's strongest sun, and working in the evening. He also began teaching the parrot, whom he named Pole, to speak its name. In November and December, his cornfields kept him busy as wild goats and rabbits began eating the young plants. To protect his crop, he quickly constructed a fence around the seeded area with a gate he could open easily. He kept his dog inside the fence at night to guard the corn. Once the plants grew tall, a new threat emerged. Birds started eating the seeds. Robinson had to shoot some and maintain constant vigilance until all the birds departed. Chapter 16 Bread. By late December, Robinson harvested his first corn. Though the yield wasn't large, he decided to save all the seeds rather than eat them, planning to plant them later for a larger harvest. Realizing he would need pots for the seeds, he searched the island for clay. His first attempts at pot making were unsuccessful. While people in England made beautiful pots, he didn't know the complete process. However, after 2 months of experimentation, he managed to create 2 large pots, which he protected by placing them in round baskets with dry grass as cushioning. As his pottery skills improved, he continued making smaller pots and long, shallow vessels for collecting salt from evaporated seawater. One day, he discovered that a broken piece of pot in the fire had become as hard as stone and turned red. This observation led him to improve his technique by surrounding complete pots with fire, making them very hard after several hours. For making flour from his seeds, Robinson crafted a tool from hard wood, creating a hole in one piece and using another piece to break the seeds, collecting the flour at the bottom. To bake bread, he mixed the flour with water and placed the dough between two hot stones near the fire. This was how he made his first bread on the island during his 3rd year. Though not perfect, he greatly enjoyed it after going so long without bread. Robinson then considered traveling around the island by sea and decided to make a canoe from a large tree. After cutting down the tree and beginning to hollow it out, he realized he had no way to move it from the forest to the beach due to a hill between them. Despite attempting various solutions, including considering digging a channel, he had to abandon the project. Many days of work were lost, teaching him to plan his work more carefully in the future. Chapter 17. Canoe. During his 4th year on the island, Robinson's clothes had become very old. He began using animal skins to make new clothing, including a cap and other garments that kept him cool in strong sun and protected him from heavy rain. He also crafted an umbrella, which took some time but proved successful. By his 5th year, Robinson had grown quite content with his island life, having everything he needed. Over the next 5 years, he decided to attempt another canoe, this time making it smaller and more manageable. When finished, he stocked it with food, water, and tools for a trip around the island. He began this journey in his 6th year, on June 6th. The start proved dangerous, as he encountered strong currents while trying to navigate around some rocks. The current began pulling him away from the island, and he feared dying in the open sea without adequate supplies for a long journey. After fighting the current for 2 hours, he managed to return to the island's coast. This victory over the currents boosted his confidence. Soon after, he discovered a small river leading inland, but it became too narrow to navigate, blocked by stones. Exploring this part of the island on foot, he found it wasn't far from his valley house. Exhausted from the journey, he fell asleep, only to be awakened by a voice calling, "Robinson, where are you?" To his surprise, it was his parrot Pole, who had learned this phrase from him and was mimicking his intonation perfectly. Though surprised to see Pole there, Robinson was happy to hear any voice speak to him. He left the canoe where it was and returned home with Pole, not attempting another such journey for a year. During this time, he focused on making tools and pots, and his basket-making skills continued to improve. Chapter 18. Foot. In his 11th year on the island, Robinson noticed his gunpowder supply was running low, which worried him as he needed it for hunting. His first goat was very old, and though he needed meat, he couldn't bring himself to kill her. She eventually died naturally, but the dwindling gunpowder forced Robinson to consider alternative ways to obtain meat. He began making traps, and after some failed attempts, successfully caught 3 young goats, 1 male and 2 females. He initially kept them in a small fenced area, but soon realized they needed more space. Over 3 months, he built a larger enclosure with plenty of grass and water. The young goats gradually became tame, eating from his hand, and within 2 years, his herd grew to 12 goats, then to more than 20 in 3 years. This provided him with plenty of milk and meat, and he learned to make cheese and butter through experimentation. One day, while walking toward the area with strong currents, Robinson reflected on his strange appearance: a big hat, short jacket, and trousers made of animal skin. No socks or shoes, but goat skin wrapped around his feet. 2 belts, one for his gun and knife, another for gunpowder, a basket on his back, and an umbrella above his head. His beard had grown very long, and he realized how much island life had changed him. While walking on the beach to check his canoe, Robinson made a shocking discovery: the mark of a human foot in the sand. Though he looked around, he saw no one. Terrified, he ran back to his house and had difficulty sleeping that night. He tried to rationalize that it might have been his own footprint, or just his imagination, which temporarily calmed him. However, when he returned to examine the print again, he found it was much larger than his own foot, renewing his fear. Chapter 19. Cannibals. The footprint discovery sent Robinson into a panic. He considered destroying his cornfields and valley house to hide any signs of habitation on the island. Unable to sleep that night, he managed to think more clearly by morning. He reasoned that people probably lived on nearby islands, and this might have been their first visit. Perhaps they wouldn't return. Though this thought brought some comfort, Robinson spent the next month fortifying his house with another fence, including holes through which he could fire his guns if attacked. He also worried about his goats and divided them between two locations, building a smaller fence in another part of the island for some of them. In his 16th year on the island, Robinson suffered a sad loss when his dog died. He cried for 3 days and shared his grief with his goats, who, though they couldn't understand his words, seemed to sense his emotions and remained unusually calm and quiet. 2 years after finding the footprint, while walking on the beach, Robinson thought he saw a canoe far out at sea. Though uncertain about this sighting, he continued his walk only to discover something horrifying. The beach was strewn with human body parts, including heads, hands, feet, fingers, and teeth, with a blackened area where a fire had been. Angry and frightened to realize the cannibals had returned, Robinson couldn't bear to look at the gruesome scene for long. Back home, he considered his options. He decided against going to sea in his canoe, knowing he stood no chance against a group of cannibals in open water. Though he kept his guns ready for protection, he avoided using them since their sound carried far. Initially, he thought about trying to kill some cannibals and save their prisoners, but after reflection, he changed his mind. He reasoned that it wasn't wise to attack them since they hadn't harmed him, and decided to act only if they threatened him directly. Chapter 20. Cave. Robinson became extremely cautious about his activities on the island, trying to minimize noise and carefully managing his fires to reduce smoke that might be visible from a distance. During one of his explorations, he discovered a small cave in the forest near the beach. Upon entering, he was startled by 2 eyes gleaming in the darkness and jumped back outside in terror. After waiting and hearing nothing, he cautiously returned to the cave's entrance to listen. Hearing what sounded like an injured creature inside, he entered slowly with his gun, only to find a dying old goat. Returning the next day to find the goat dead, he realized the cave would make an excellent hiding place near the beach, so he stored some of his guns and gunpowder there. 23 years had passed since Robinson's arrival on the island, and he had established a comfortable life with many animals around him. Paul had learned to repeat his name and other words clearly, and he had acquired 2 more parrots whom he also taught to say his name. His goat herd had grown to more than 30 animals. In the final month of his 23rd year, while walking to his fields early one morning, Robinson spotted a fire on the beach. He immediately returned home, prepared all his guns, and approached the beach with his telescope. Hiding himself, he observed 9 naked people with 2 canoes, apparently waiting for high tide. After they left, he went to the beach and found it once again covered in blood and bones. Angry, he vowed to kill as many cannibals as possible when he next saw them, but they didn't return for a long time. One evening after a large storm, Robinson heard a gun firing at sea. Going outside, he saw a light on the water, followed by a second shot. Believing it to be a ship in distress, signaling for help, he gathered dry wood and made a large fire on the beach. They seemed to see his signal as they fired again. Robinson stayed up until midnight maintaining the fire, excited at the prospect of speaking to someone, but no one came ashore. This puzzled him, and he hoped morning would bring answers. Chapter 21. Visitors. The next morning, Robinson saw an empty ship stuck far from the beach. Unable to understand why he hadn't encountered the people who had fired the guns the previous night, he took his canoe out to investigate. As he approached the Spanish-looking vessel, He found a dog who was overjoyed to see him. Robinson gave the hungry and thirsty animal bread and water, but found no people aboard the ship. The mystery of the missing crew troubled him, but he took advantage of the situation to salvage useful items from the ship. He found boxes of various sizes, including large ones full of alcohol that were too heavy to transport. He took guns, gunpowder, and other useful items, including some new shirts, gold, silver, and, most importantly, shoes, which he particularly needed. He made 5 trips to the ship, taking everything useful before hiding his canoe. Life returned to normal, though Robinson often thought about the ship's crew and the cannibals on the beach. One March night, he dreamed that 2 canoes of cannibals landed on the beach, and one of their prisoners escaped to his house. In the dream, Robinson saved him, and the man became his friend who helped him navigate the dangerous waters around the island. Upon waking, the dream stayed with him, and he realized that with someone's help, escape from the island might be possible. This led him to watch the beach more carefully every day for the next 2 years, hoping to see the canoes. His wish finally came true one afternoon when he spotted 5 canoes carrying more than 30 men landing on the beach. Unable to attack such a large group, Robinson watched through his telescope as they made a fire and danced around it. He saw 2 bound prisoners, one of whom was beaten and killed, with the cannibals painting their bodies with his blood. Though horrified, Robinson could do nothing against so many. The second prisoner, while the cannibals were distracted, managed to break free and run toward Robinson's direction. Only 2 cannibals gave chase, and Robinson saw this as his opportunity to save someone. Chapter 22. Friday. As the escaped prisoner ran past Robinson's hiding place behind a tree, the first pursuing cannibal came close enough for Robinson to jump out and shoot him. The second cannibal, seeing this, tried to shoot an arrow but was also shot by Robinson. The prisoner, who had stopped at the sound of gunfire, turned back in fear. Robinson smiled to show him it was safe to approach. The man came forward, knelt down, and placed Robinson's foot on his head in a gesture of submission. Robinson helped him stand, and the man examined the dead cannibals with amazement, particularly the gunshot wounds, which he seemed unable to comprehend. After taking the arrows from the dead men, they hid the bodies in the nearby forest and retreated to Robinson's cave, where no one could find them. Robinson gave his new companion bread, meat, and water. The man, exhausted, fell asleep almost immediately, giving Robinson a chance to observe him. He appeared to be about 25 years old, slim but strong, with long black hair, dark skin, and pleasant features. While the man slept, Robinson kept watch outside the cave for any pursuing cannibals, but none appeared. 3 hours later, when the man emerged from the cave, he expressed his gratitude for being saved. Robinson began teaching him basic words, naming him Friday, since that was the day he had saved him. He taught Friday to say, yes, and no, and told him his own name. They spent that night in the cave, and the next day, Robinson used his telescope to confirm the canoes had departed. They cautiously returned to the beach, first checking on the hidden bodies of the dead cannibals. When Friday indicated he wanted to eat them, Robinson angrily showed his disapproval, realizing that Friday was also a cannibal. After burying the bodies, they found the beach littered with human bones and blood-stained sand. Robinson had Friday collect all the body parts, which they then burned in a large fire. Back at his house, Robinson made a small tent for Friday between his 2 fence lines and initially took away his weapons for safety. However, he soon realized this precaution was unnecessary, as Friday proved to be a loyal and honest companion, like a child to Robinson, who became like a father to him. Friday later demonstrated his devotion by showing willingness to give his life for Robinson. Robinson was overjoyed to have companionship on the island at last, and began teaching Friday everything he knew about European life. He started with basic words like, hi, hello, bye, and thank you. Though the learning process was initially challenging, Robinson remained patient, happy to finally have someone to talk to.